Do you guys like it?
Yeah!
I'd like to welcome back to the stage, Jefferson. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for staying. I appreciate it. Thank you. So I'm just going to start really simple, and this is not a joke. I've been tracking this project for a long time. American Fiction was not the title on the script.
No, the title on the script was Fuck. Now that you guys have seen the movie, you understand why.
Yeah.
So I sent out the script and it said Fuck by Jefferson. And I hope that, I wrote this on spec, so I had no idea if anybody was going to be interested, and I felt like at least this is going to get people to open the email. If as long as there's spam folders, that was another problem.
I guess, look, obviously, it feels very personal. It's a very thoughtful film. But I'm wondering if there was an incident or a couple incidents that you're comfortable talking about that were kind of the impetus for the idea of this movie.
Yeah. So I was a journalist for about 8 or 9 years before I started working in film and television. And toward the end of my journalism career, I published this article called The Racism Beat, which was about how essentially my job had become sort of like black trauma. And so people would write to me and they'd say, do you want to write about Trayvon Martin being killed? Do you want to write about Mike Brown being killed? Do you want to write about this person saying something racist about Barack Obama? And I started to feel like, is this what I have to offer? Is this, is this the only stories that people think I can tell? Is this the best use of my skill set? And so I left that behind and I started working in film and TV in 2014, and I was like, great, I'm working in the world of fiction. I can write about, we can write about people on Mars, we can write about people, wielding swords with unicorns, like that. The world is open, and people came to me and they said, do you want to write, are you interested in writing about this slave? Are you interested in writing about this drug dealer? Are you interested in writing about this gang member? And it sort of felt like I was struck by this idea that the limitations that people saw for me in journalism in the real world are the same limitations people see for me in the world of fiction and fantasy. And it's sort of it was obviously, it's just boring from a creative standpoint, but intellectually and emotionally it felt like, this speaks to something which to me speaks to the idea that there are people who don't see Black people's lives as being as full as anybody else's life. That sort of we are defined by our tragedy, we are defined by our misery, we are defined by the bad things that have happened to us, and that is the most interesting thing that we have to share with the world. And that's painful. It's painful to sort of feel that is what people want from you, is just sort of your misery. And so, I have, and it's not just me. I have a good friend who tells this story. This happened a couple of years ago. She's a Black woman who's working in. She's a journalist and she's trying to get into film and television. She came to LA to take meetings with producers, and this production company asked her, what are you interested in writing? And she said, I'm a child of the '90s, so I'm really interested in erotic thrillers. I don't feel like people make erotic thrillers anymore. She's like, I really love rom-coms. I'd love to write a rom-com. And they were like, okay, interesting. We'll get back to you with some ideas soon. And she said, okay. And she left. And about 3 hours later, they called her and they said, we've got this great idea we think you'd be perfect for. And it's about this blind slave who, thanks to a wealthy white benefactor, learns to play the piano and becomes this piano prodigy. And sort of and it's this incredibly enriching story. And she was like, well, that would be a very bad rom-com, it sounds like. I don't think I can make a rom-com out of that. And so I just think that there's this poverty of imagination when it comes to what Black life looks like in people's minds. And it's sort of it's restricted to these very specific negative, tragic circumstances. And it's not just Black. I have Mexican friends who work in entertainment who say, why does everything in Mexico have to be about cartels or somebody trying to escape their miserable circumstances from their poor community on their way toward the glory land that is the United States of America? And it all has to have that weird orangish brown wash over over the screen anytime they're shooting in Mexico. Like, why is this what is most interesting to people? And so, you know, there is a lot of me in this film. Like obviously the book was published in 2001, and so this is something that people have been talking about for a long time. But there is, you know, there is a lot of me and a lot of my experience infused in there as well.
Yeah, I was curious, because I'm gonna open it up, but before I do, you know, you've done all this incredible TV writing too. And I read this quote from Dale Lim, who made, sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the movie, the Asian girls trip movie.
Yeah,
Joyride, yes. Saying that because she had come from TV writing, and she said, you know, the three of us were writing for white men for years and years and years. And you've done all this incredible writing on shows like Watchmen and all these other shows where you're writing for all kinds of people from all backgrounds and races and all these things. And I'm curious kind of the difference in coming to your own characters, and does it feel to you like you want to put more of yourself in them, or is it more like it comes from the idea and then you come to what the characters are going to be?
I mean, I think that it's both, right? I think that I don't ever want to sort of like let my own impulses guide the creative. I sort of like think that it's best to just go from project to project and see what it needs. But this project, the reason I wanted to direct this, having never directed anything before, was just that I read this book and I felt it so deep in my bones. And it wasn't just, you know, I referenced it a little bit earlier, but like, you know, this, besides just the satirical professional stuff, you know, I have two older brothers, and our sibling dynamic is very sort of, you know, it's very push and pull, the way that a lot of people's sibling dynamics are. I have a very overbearing father, the way that they have a very overbearing father. My mother died of cancer 8 years ago, and you know, it wasn't dementia, but I moved home for a period of time to try to take care of her. Before I was there, and my other brother was there, our oldest brother was the one who sort of like took on the responsibility of taking care of her. So this is, you know, this was a project that I think is particularly, I was driven toward it because I felt very close to the material. But yeah, there's a little bit of me in everybody, you know, except for Lisa. Like I'm basically half monk, half Cliff. Like I'm the youngest, like spoiled baby the way that Cliff is, but I'm like got this prickly, angry nature the way that Monk does. So, but there's parts of me in every single aspect of every character.
It never shows, the prickly angry nature. I'm going to open it up to the audience. Does anybody have any questions? We'll start right here.
I was really struck with your opening credit sequence. It felt very classic, and I just wonder if you can talk about the decision to do the opening credits as you did.
So for the back of the room, the question was about the opening credit sequence and how it felt very classic and the decision to do it that way.
Thank you. That is, the opening credit sequence was, I will say that the only good thing that Instagram has given me in my life is that opening credit sequence. We were sitting around, and the thing that I always wanted from the movie was I wanted it to feel like it could exist in any time period. And so there's a reason why I never showed a Zoom screen, despite the fact that they're clearly on Zoom. It's because I felt like when you see Zoom screens in a movie, you're like, oh, I can tell exactly when this movie was made. You know, this movie was made between 2020 and like 2025. And so I wanted to avoid ever showing the actual Zoom screens because I felt like that it takes away from sort of like what you want, which is sort of like a movie that can feel like people could watch it 50 years from now and still feel like it's relevant to them and pertinent. I didn't want sort of like technology that exists right now to sort of like muddy that. And so when it came time to do the title sequences, you know, I was really driven by like, I know that I wanted credit sequences. Like I know it's become very cool to not have no credits and sort of like just put the name of the movie put the title of the movie at the end of the film, and those are like, that's when you begin the credits. But I wanted a nice, I just sort of like wanted a nice, like I've been watching a lot of old movies recently, and especially when I was making this movie, and I really liked the idea of just like these kind of like stylized opening credit sequences where sort of like where there's a lot of great illustrations and sort of like you took time to listen to a nice song, and you know that's the aesthetic choice, but also the sort of like more practical choice about it was that it gave us a nice break between Monk being in LA and Monk being in Boston. So it's sort of like that was sort of like a more practical consideration for those. But I was on Instagram one day thinking about all this, and I saw this illustration of a flower. And I was like, this is kind of cool. And I checked into it, and it's this woman named Isabella Cotier. She's a British illustrator. And I reached out to her and asked her if she'd do the illustrations, and she leapt at the opportunity. And I thought, she just watched the film, and I said, just watch the movie. And then she was like, I want to talk to you, to like just say like words. It was almost like a sort of like she was just said, say words about characters. And so I just sat there and kind of described the characters in this sort of just off the cuff way, and she just wrote things down, and then she would come back to me a couple days later with her illustrations. I love it. I'm very happy. You're the first person to ask about the opening credit sequence, so thank you.
So I know there's a lot of parallels to Marlon Briggs's ethnic notions in the way Black people have been portrayed in media as a lasting damaging effect. Is that something that you think is still relevant today as it was in the 80s when you made the documentary?
I don't know what you're talking about, but what is it called?
It's called Ethnic Notions.
Ethnic Notions. Yeah. I don't know what Ethnic Notions is, but I should watch it. It sounds interesting to me. And I would say that, yeah, I do think that, having not seen this, I'm just going to speak off the cuff extemporaneously. Hopefully it has some applicability to what you're talking about. But yeah, I do think that, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think that the sort of like, I think the damaging notions are again, it goes back to this idea that like our lives are not deep and complex and nuanced. And that our lives, there's nothing, I'm not going to say, because I can't truthfully say that I've never been stopped by the police, in my opinion, unfairly. But I will say that is not something that happens constantly, and it's also one of the least interesting things about my life. And I think that sort of like that is something to keep in mind, is that none of this is to say that like there isn't racism in this country and that Black people don't experience it constantly. But also, it is one of the least interesting things about our lives, because it says nothing about us. It says everything about the people who are racist against us. So it actually has nothing to do with Black people. It's the least interesting thing about the Black community to me. And so I would say that, to me, like, all of these things happen, and I'm not saying that movies about that stuff shouldn't exist. I love 12 Years a Slave. I love New Jack City, which is in the film. And these movies are very good and important. But I also have a problem with the idea that these movies should exist to the omission of all other kinds of movies. I think that, for me, the thing that I think about a lot is the first time that I ever encountered trans people, the idea of a trans person, was in Ace Ventura. I don't know if anybody else saw that movie, but there's a trans person in that movie, and she is a sexual predator, and she preys on men who don't know that she is trans, and then at the end when people find out that she's trans, there's a big dramatic scene where people are like puking and disgusted and revolted by this idea that they had sex with her. And that was my first discovery of a trans person. And I was like, oh, okay, this is what I know about this person. And then years later I saw Boys Don't Cry. And it was sort of like an entire inversion of what I had learned when I was a young boy about trans people. And so I think that absolutely, like, we are kidding ourselves if we don't think that people take away notions and ideas about other people in cinema and film and television. Like, these are where you learn about other people. And so, to me, absolutely, if all we're showing is just like Black trauma and Black people as slaves and Black people as gangbangers and Black people as drug dealers and Black people as, single mothers addicted to crack, it's like, that starts to, people start to build ideas about Blackness based on that. And I think that, to me, that stuff was never, it never sort of like actually spoke to me. Like, when I read this novel, it was finally like, oh, this is interesting because it's a bunch of complex Black people, and it's not about drug dealers or gangs or violence. It was just sort of Black people living their lives. And I think that, so yeah, I've never seen the film that you're referencing. I think that I should watch it, but if you're asking if I think that these kinds of stories still have an impact and an influence, I'm rambling now, sorry. But to continue answering the question, I read a fascinating article in 2014, and I thought that I had misremembered it, and I went back recently to see if I had remembered it correctly. And in 2014, they published this study that said that 75% of white Americans had not a single friend of color. I actually thought the statistic was that they didn't have a black friend, but it was 75% of white Americans do not have a friend who is not white. And to me, that was shocking, but also, so many people get their ideas about other people from film and television. And that stuff has a real effect about how people think about other people. And I don't think that, I also don't think that, that is a problem of white people. I think that, this country, if you believe that this country was built on racist ideals, which I do, this country is designed to keep us apart. This country, redlining and segregation, this country and our institutions and our cities were designed intentionally so that we wouldn't know each other. And so I don't necessarily fault white people, those 75% of white people who don't have friends of color, because this country was designed that way. And so I think that, for me, as somebody who's trying to make art, I would like to invite those people in who don't know people of color, who don't experience sort of other people who are different from them, and hopefully show them sort of a different thing than they've seen normally. And again, I don't think that those movies shouldn't exist. I think that those are important movies, but to me, it was important to try to reflect something that was a little bit different in the world. That's all. But what was it again what was the name of the movie?
Ethnic Notions.
Ethnic Notions. Okay, I'm writing that down. I'm going to write that down.
Right here.
I really appreciated the multi-layers of the black characters and also their multi-responsibilities, because even when you're a producer, you're a writer, you still have family, you have connections, and I really appreciated seeing black people shown in their fullest. I also really appreciated the fact that we had a Philadelphia actress in here.
Eric Alexander. Yeah. Eric Alexander. Forever.
Theater, which is black now, and it shouldn't be. We should be on stage if we appear. Also, one of the parting scenes when the black man who is in character as an enslaved person gives the peace sign to the brother when he's leaving upset. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was a very last minute thing. That was a scene that did not exist in the original iteration of the film, and it's something that I went back and added in because I felt like the ending needed something that sort of was a nice little coda. So thank you.
Yeah, it ties together nicely. Right here.
We can go.
Yeah.
First, congratulations.
Thank you.
How did you come to the name of Thelonious and then Monk? And did you consider using any of his music?
So the question was, how did you come to the name Thelonious and then Monk, and did you consider using any of his music?
So that was the name of the character in the book. I wish I had a better story for you than that. But he's in the book, he's Thelonious Monk Ellison. And I wanted to use some of his music, but it was so expensive that if we had used his music, we wouldn't have been able to use Autumn Leaves, which plays over the end, that Cannonball Adderley song. And so it was sort of like a Sophie's choice between a Monk song or the Cannonball Adderley song, right? And I just love the Cannonball Adderley. That song is like, I think we got that for $70,000. But the reason we got it for $70,000, Miles Davis plays on that. The reason we got it for only $70,000 is because that was like one of the only recordings where Miles Davis played in somebody else's band. Because if I wanted a Miles Davis song, that's like at least $150,000. So we got a super big bargain on that. But we had to make some sacrifices with other music. And so I would have loved to use some Monk, but we didn't.
Did you? There was one.
It's also about the music. Going off that point, what was the process like working with Laura Carpin on the score? Because I really loved it.
So the question was about the process of working on the score.
So Laura, we interviewed a few different composers, and I always knew that I wanted jazz to be at the forefront of the score. And Laura just came in and immediately had some interpretations of scenes that she had already written music for, had already had some ideas for the family theme, and she just came in and sort of like really, I feel like she understood the material right away and sort of like what we were trying to do right away. And I just immediately felt a connection to her, and we just, we went from there. I'm a complete layman when it comes to music. I know what I like, but I don't know anything beyond that. I can't speak intelligently really about making music and composing music. But the greatest thing about Laura was that she was just incredibly collaborative the entire time. And so I would come in and I would say, this doesn't feel right, or this feels a little too saccharine here. And sort of the composition for the film, I think, was difficult because, this is not a movie, you guys have just seen it, that is sort of like easily categorized as comedy and drama. So there are scenes where you have sort of very dramatic moments that rise into comedic moments and vice versa. And so you need somebody with a pretty deft, steady hand to sort of make sure that you're accommodating all those different emotional interpretations and twists and turns in the scene. So it was long. It was a long process. We sat at her house for a long time, going over scenes and saying like, this feels right or this doesn't feel right. But ultimately, we arrived at a place that I'm really proud of the music, and I'm happy that she noticed it. I think that she did a tremendous job.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. The glasses.
You said that you were a journalist and you felt like they put you in a box. In what ways did you help Mom direct, like, history to it and the overall?
So the question was, you had mentioned how you were a journalist and you felt like they were putting you in a box. In what ways did you help Monk through his journey through it and the overall theme?
So to me, I know I said earlier that I'm sort of like both Cliff and Monk, but I think that like I'm particularly Monk. And so to me, I don't want to interpret the film for anybody. I think that's the point of the film is to not spoon feed you guys any morality or ideas that I want you to sort of like feel like you've been convinced to believe the way that I believe. But I will say that when I watch this movie, I see a lot of anger. And I have a lot of anger in my life. I feel pretty angry almost every day. And I had this great therapist years ago who told me this thing that I think about constantly, which is that she said that anger is not a real emotion, that anger is a secondary emotion. That underneath anger always is either pain or fear. And particularly men, the hardest thing in the world for me to say up until a few years ago was, you hurt my feelings. I felt very weak saying that. I felt like it's shameful and embarrassing for a man to say that. And I felt the same way about saying like I'm scared. And so I think that what you're seeing in Monk is a guy whose feelings have been hurt. And in my mind, the way that he sort of reacts to his feelings being hurt is lashing out and alienating people and shoving his siblings away and shoving his family away and shoving romantic partners away and shoving his students away and his colleagues. And so to me, I never set out to sort of like give Monk a specific journey, but I think that, for me, this woman here referenced earlier this sort of like last moment when he gives the head nod to the guy dressed as the slave. That to me is Monk realizing that, like, how misplaced his anger has been, in that, the thing that, one of the scenes that I love best in the movie is the scene between Monk and Santara, when they're sort of like debating what it is to be an artist, and particularly a black artist, and sort of like their differing ideologies. And I would say that, the thing that I think Monk realizes in that moment is that, and hopefully the audience realizes in that moment, is that, all of a sudden this person that you've thought of as the villain, all of a sudden is not the villain. And it's sort of like actually a person who's smart and just has a different opinion from Monk. And so, to me, I think where Monk ends up, and when she says, like, do you reserve your ire for other people, or is it strictly reserved for black women? I think that, to me, Monk, at that end, when he sort of, like, notices the guy in the slave garb, what's happening there is that this is a guy who realizes, sort of, like, profoundly, finally, that, which is something that I needed to learn, and sort of something that I learned not long before I started working on this movie, which is that getting angry at individuals and individual artists is a misplaced anger, in my opinion. I think that the more appropriate and valid and important question is, why are the people atop these things making these institutions and systems in the way they're making them? And so for me, it's like, I'm not angry at artists. Okay, yeah, please clap. But I think that, like, I think it holds true for everything. Like, we infight so much as individuals, and I think that actually sort of like our ire should be directed at the people who are 10 layers above us. Monk's anger at Centaura is misplaced, because Centaura is just working in a system that's already been built years before she even became an artist. She's working within institutions that have been around for centuries. And all she's doing is trying to make a living and make her art within the confines of what other people have created. And so to me, that was a huge eye-opener for me, in that I realized, like, oh, I can't be mad at other artists. I can't be mad at other people doing what I'm doing. Art is hard. It's hard to be a creative person. It's hard to make a living doing this. And so people who sort of like do what they need to do to survive and to live a creative life, far be it for me to criticize them for doing what they need to do to make their art. I'm more interested in, and I think a better question is, who are atop these systems that these people are working within, and why are they making the decisions that they are making? And so, for me, it's a lot about, this is a guy who's dealing with anger because he's been hurt, and it's him trying to, hopefully, this is my interpretation. Again, I'm not trying to spoon feed you guys anything, but to me, hopefully, what Monk has realized is that, like, when he sees that guy, is like he's coming out of this moment, in which he's sort of, kind of made a concession to a person that he doesn't want to make a concession to in order to get this thing made. And he finally sort of like can look at this other person who's in the same situation that he's just been in, and he's no longer isolated, he's no longer an island. He sees him and says, like, oh, I understand, like, we're in this together. And sort of like, my enemy is not you, your enemy is not me. In fact, like, the real person that we should be directing our anger toward is way, 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 way up here. So that is ultimately the way that I interpret it.
I think we have to wrap up, but the film comes out in November.
No, December 15th.
Oh,
yeah,
December
December 15th. It was
Sorry.
changed. Yeah.
If you like it, please tell everyone you know.
Yes, please. Yeah. Thank you so much for staying here.
And please, thank you for
Thank you.
This is his first feature, so it will be his first time on the stage, but I really hope, I know it won't be his last, and I know after tonight you will all always remember him. So I'd like to welcome Cord Jefferson to the stage.
Thank you all so much. This means a lot to me. Before I directed this movie, I never directed anything. I never directed Traffic. I had a buddy who had just finished directing his first feature film, and I asked him, I said, what's a piece of advice that you could give me that I should take with me every day? And he said, the main thing to know is that if you show up, he said there's going to be moments when you're frustrated and cold and tired and hungry, and if you show up in those moments and you're a jerk and you lash out at people and you yell and scream and throw things, that energy is going to permeate the entire set, and everybody's going to lash out and throw things and be a jerk, and it's going to be a miserable experience for everybody. So he said, no matter what, try to show up and have a good day, regardless of what's going on in your personal life or going on in the film. And so I had this practice that I did every time that I was feeling bad or tired or hungry or cold. And I would stop and I would look around and I would see the dozens of people who were around me who were missing time with their families and friends and missing concerts they wanted to go to or movies they wanted to see or things they wanted to do, to be there with me at 1 a.m. in the cold, in the rain, making this movie. And immediately I would be overcome with just gratitude and just joy. And it made the experience just truly the honor of my life. And that continues here tonight. Like this, you know, I hear there's a Phillies game tonight. This is Philadelphia is a great city. There's any number of things you could be doing tonight. And you're here to see this film. And it truly means the world to me. Making this movie was the honor of my life. And the fact that you're here to support it and celebrate with me is the honor continues. So thank you all so much for being here. It really is. And I want to thank Michael and everybody else at the Philadelphia Film Festival for having me on opening night. As he said, you know, this movie is about storytelling. And it's also, I made it to be seen in an audience full of people. Like, I think that, you know, I have notes on the Nicole Kidman AMC ad. I know it's great. I like it as much as the rest of you. It's entertaining when people know it word for word, but I think the thing about that ad that's strange is she's in an empty movie theater. You know, like that's not why you go to the movies, to sit in an empty theater and watch it by yourself. You know, I think we should treat the theatrical experience like live music. You probably have a record player or something at home that you can listen to music on, but the reason you go to a live performance is because you want to be there with other people who are experiencing the same thing that you are. And so I made this movie to be seen with a lot of people. I hope that you laugh and have a good time and leave with a smile on your face. I will be back afterward to talk with Michael and discuss it with you guys. So yeah, just thank you so much for being here. It really means a lot.